Hello, and welcome to this session focusing on immune health. I'm today's host, AJ Paul, Graduate Fellow at VitaFoods. Before we begin, I would like to remind our audience that there will be a Q&A box located in the top right corner of the platform where you can submit any questions you have for our speakers. These will be answered, time permitting, at the end of the presentation. Our first speaker joining us is Ken Israel, the founder of Innovation Nutrition Consultancy, a boutique product development and innovation consultancy operating in the US and Europe, serving supplement, functional food, and nutraceutical ingredient firms. His presentation will focus on the future of immune supplements. Ken, I'll turn things over to you.
Well, Ajay, thank you so much for the introduction. And VitaFoods, it is such a pleasure to be back, albeit digital this time, and looking forward to a conversation with all of you. I'm going to go over a brief intro for me, so you understand from whence I come, and then we're going to jump into some of the content today. So my background, I've been a willing participant in the dietary supplements and health space for over 3 decades, my whole professional career. I started off as an herbalist and nutritionist. I migrated into product development, spent a decade and a half in contract manufacturing, and then have been consulting in product development and regulatory affairs in the US and Europe for the last 7 years full time, but on and off for over 20 years. I've had the privilege of co-founding Beyond Brands, which is a brand development and product development agency out of New York, as well as my own practice, Innovation Nutrition Consulting. I also serve as a member of Compliance, Product and Label Integrity at the Natural Products Association, which is the largest, oldest trade group in the United States. So given my background, I've done a fair amount of work in the immune space and have been an eager trend watcher and participant for years. With that, I'm just going to kind of jump into the presentation today and get things going. So let's see if I can get my slides to advance. There we go. So I think before we start talking about the future of immune supplements, it's probably a really good idea to deepen, refresh, and strengthen the understanding of what we can, what we're talking about with the immune system. At its most basic, the immune system is struggling with managing the relationship between self and non-self. And this has many, many definitions. It could be the outside world. Viruses and bacteria are most people think of when they think of non-self. It could be environmental toxins. It could be lesser versions of ourself, such as aging cells, malfunctioning cells. That process is called autophagy, or kind of weeding out the bad guys. There's damaged cells and tissues, most commonly referred to as cancers. The immune system's job is to identify and take those bad guys out before they take over. I think most people don't realize that excuse me, immune challenges, that the largest job the immune system does is make sure you're fed every day. We have this self, non-self dichotomy working almost continuously with the contents of our gut. We're taking things from outside the body and bringing them in. So that kind of leads to the next question, which is, where is the immune system located in the body? And most major systems, you say the cardiovascular system, oh, that's my heart and my veins, or neurocognitive, it's my brain and nerve cells, the neural network of the body. For different systems, the immune system is a little more difficult to pin down. We have some of the classic views of it, where up high you have the lymph nodes and thymus, you have the spleen. I provide a little red image of the spleen and a blue background at the bottom of the slide. The bones are extremely important, specifically the bone marrow. Bone marrow is where many of our immune cells are born. But the two giant repositories of immune activity are the gut and the gut-associated lymphoid tissues. And I'll talk more to this in just a moment. And also every membrane in the body, those demarcation points between what is me and what isn't, what is you and what is not. So your skin, the respiratory tract, digestive system, urogenital tract. Going back into the gut and the galt, the digestive system, we're learning more and more every day about the delicate balance between the microbiome, the mucous membranes, and how the body functions in the digestive system. About 70% of immune cells and lymphoid tissue surround the gut. So it's getting an awful lot of attention. And it's doing an extraordinary complex job pulling good guys, good stuff in and trying to keep bad guys out. And the very definition of what are the bad guys is changing, in that we realize that most bacteria, take E. coli for an example, need to be present for the body to function correctly. But if they get out of balance, if the wrong strain becomes too abundant, if this ecosystem gets disrupted, we have big problems. When I go back to that discussion of self versus non-self, there are more cells in you that aren't you than there are cells of you. This is a complex statement, but suffice it to say, your microbiome outnumbers you by at least 10 to 1. So you're talking many tens of trillions of cells. And that does not include this substrate of phages, et cetera. So, most people are familiar with probiotic bacteria. Some people think, oh yeah, there's yeasts in there too, and probably some fungi. But the phages get really interesting because that's the ecosystem on your ecosystem. And those number, I don't even know the words beyond trillions. It's a lot. So again, this self, non-self, complex dance. Every surface of your body has a commensal microbiome, and all internal systems, now it's appearing, also have microbiomes. We'll learn more about this in the future. This talk is not about that, but I think it's important to be aware of it, and to kind of start a larger thinking of how this massive immune function works. We're going to kind of drill into that now on function. So what are we supplementing and why? We have this immune system. It could roughly be cleaved into two parts, the innate and the adaptive. The innate is your first line. It's non-specific. It seems to be more membrane focused. Its primary tool is inflammation. If we go back to the Roman Celsius, it was calor, dolor, rubor, and tumor, the four markers or hallmarks of inflammation: heat, pain, redness, and swelling. And your immune system does that. So next time you think that, oh, I'll just take anti-inflammatories, maybe. Sometimes these responses are actually quite important. One of the big responses that we're not most psychologically aware of most of the time is increased permeability. This is how the body speeds white blood cells, these phagocytes and leukocytes, to sites of injury. It's also how we flush pathogens off. So, I get a runny nose or mucus in my lungs. That's the body's normal, healthy response. And in managing immune function, I think sometimes we look to suppress symptoms too quickly. And I'm going to talk more about this a little later in the various, in the maturation of what the natural products industry has looked at for immune supplements. But some of this is quite important. When we start looking at function, again, we have phagocytic cells. These are, basically they engulf and destroy pathogenic bacteria or foreign materials. They then digest these and basically start wearing pieces of what they killed as trophies on their skin or on their cell surface to signal other cells, these are bad guys. This is what chunks of them look like. Attack them. So this is the beginning of this natural signaling process. And it's, from a warfare perspective, it's absolutely brutal. what's going on within the skin. There's chemical assault and physical assault against these bad guys. It's quite an interesting dance. So if we look at the chart with the human there, that right side is the first layer of immune function. And again, it's mostly barrier-based, mucous membranes, skin, etc., scavenging off damaged tissue. As this happens, usually it's successful early on. Most insults are addressed this way, but not everything is. And that's really where adaptive immune function gets recruited. And these require certain signaling cells. So within those lymphocytes, you have a cool class of cells called CD8 cytotoxic cells, and these can attack viruses. You have CD4s, T helper cells. All of these go to work against the proverbial bad guys. The adaptive immune system is part two of this response. It's a learned response. It's a very highly specific response, either to pathogens or to specific classes of damaged cells that express differences in their cell surface. A note on that, the body has to learn. When it doesn't learn, you can land up in a system called anergy, where something bad is going on and the fire alarms aren't pulled. The APB, all points bulletin for the bad guys, isn't posted yet. And that's frequently what happens with things like cancers, new viruses. We don't know anything about those right now. So getting the body to respond, getting that secondary response is actually quite a complex dance. Typically, you're using chemokines, which are chemical markers, but also we leverage cytokines, cytotoxic T cells and helper cells to attack. You then some of these will morph into memory cells to create a memory of these bad guys. And these are all thymus, or when you hear T cell, think thymus-based cells. You also have B cells. B cells, think of bone-derived immune cells. That's where your T helpers come from. This is where your big antibodies come from. And what antibodies are, I have a beautiful kind of rainbow-colored picture on the lower right. That's an antibody, and antibodies are basically complexes of sugars and protein that stick specifically to certain targets, marking them for destruction. So those are the laser systems of the smart bombs in our immune system. Above that, by the way, I have a T cell, and down below I have a helper cell with a bunch of antigens ready to mark up the bad guys. So these antibodies are really important, and I kind of think of them as tags and blocks. They can tag things for destruction, or they can kind of act like monkey wrenches and bind up receptor sites or entrance tools to get into cells. So these are activators and signaling complexes. So it's really quite a complex dance. At this point, I think we're going to probably jump forward a little bit into Immune 1.0. So we've developed now an understanding of how the immune system works. Now we have to figure out how to leverage nutrients and botanicals and other nutraceutical compounds, how to affect change here. When I say Immune 1.0, when I joined the industry 30 years ago, products like echinacea were basically the go-tos. You also had some zinc lozenges. Some folks had figured that out already. And vitamin C. Those were the primary players. Elderberry was just beginning to emerge into the market. And then we had what I affectionately call wisdom from the East and yeast. There was Chinese medicine, and Chinese medicine brought amazing plants and very different thinking to us. Probably one of the first companies to leverage that in the US was Planetary Formulas. Michael Tierra and Christopher Hobbs's brilliant work. So formulations like Jade Screen by them made it out. And these were antiviral and immune support formulas. And then when I say yeasts, there was also the early emergence of beta glucans. We didn't understand them nearly so well as we do now, but there was clearly indications that yeasts and glucans would be interesting in immune function. And this has actually panned out quite well for the industry. More on that as we continue the discussion. So we had an immune 1.0 that kind of meandered along until basically the 90s. In the 90s, we started getting a little more sophisticated. You had complex formulas emerge that supported multiple parts of the immune system using multi-nutrient approaches, higher doses of actives. Most of these, however, were really focused on the innate immune system, not so much on advanced. So this is, I want to say, a time of great change. We also had some illegal claims enter the market, cancer, autoimmune functions, and I want to say dealing with chronic long-term conditions that became problematic in the industry. On the upside, we started leveraging beta-glucans much more effectively. Think of amazing ingredients like Wellmune. You started getting immune care and immune preparation making its appearance in formulas like Epicor, and some cool homeopathic agents, but these have really fallen out of fashion. The next phase of our journey was Immune 2020, the emergence of a global pandemic, and an initial wave were plants like elderberry, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc lozenges, to a lesser extent immune probiotics make their emergence. Later in that process, you had ingredients like quercetin and acetylcysteine. For a short time, CBD. Vitamin K has now emerged, and certainly the shroom boom, or the emergence of medicinal mushrooms en masse. You also had other agents make it into the market, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, convalescent plasma, and monoclonal antibodies. All of these seem to become much more prominent in the market. What did we learn in 2020? That comorbidities matter, and that was primarily having an apple-shaped body, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, overweight, out of shape, aged. Age is not a number. I always like my Kachava guy over here, the perfect picture of aging gracefully and powerfully. Prolonged stress damages our well-being, and nothing like a global pandemic and massive disruption. And now, who knows, maybe World War III to ratchet up our long-term stress. We learned that gut health and microbiome diversity are incredibly important for immune function. And I'm going to talk a little more to this later, but this is really one of the areas that it really started to come into focus, that so goes your gut, so goes your immune health. I want to send kudos to Chris Hansen and team for their work with their probiotics during the pandemic, and clearly demonstrating that Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG can change the trajectory of early COVID infection. What we did not learn, we didn't learn to trust science so well. We didn't really embrace our profound interconnectedness as a species. We didn't focus enough on supply chains and kind of take many of those early warnings about global sustainability, that extensive supply chains leave us vulnerable. And we continue to struggle with that today. Anybody in the industry recognizes that. We did learn that masking and hand sanitation and social distancing can really impact immune function. Global antibiotic sales dropped by 30% during the pandemic. This is not focused on so much. And cough and cold OTC remedies dropped significantly during the pandemic because we weren't spreading as many bacteria and viruses. There were key learnings there, but we kind of reject it. We don't like masks and social distancing. Excuse me. So what's the state of the immune system today? The new normal, vitamin D and vitamin K are accepted. Kudos to the industry. Everybody's stressed out, and that's really given birth to the age of the adaptogen, plants like ashwagandha and other nervines. Other adaptogens have become increasingly important for immune function and for wellness overall. This self, non-self, I think we need to include our brain in our immune system and really start to manage and support its function, not so much in neurocognitive, but wake sleep cycles and how we manage stress, meditation, yoga, keeping the brain focused on getting involved in sport and enriching relationships, or maybe even spirituality. We have this, I use the before Barbie and after Barbie image as a guide point to us for, am I fat? Well, most people, COVID-19 meant too many hours in front of TV and some real challenges with putting on 19 pounds, not necessarily getting the virus. And that leads to comorbidities. So, this am I fat question, if you're asking, yes, you probably are, and probably need to be a little more proactive about one's diet and exercise habits. And that will have massive impact on immune function. Adiposity, or extra weight, gives you an extra metabolic organ. I call it the inflammome, which is a source of chronic inflammation in the body. So we really do need to manage this more effectively. The next question is immune support. What will we do? What will we do differently? And that's going to come next. I do also want to talk briefly to post-COVID and long haulers. This is opening up a whole realm of questions in the immune sciences space. What happens when you have a really big immune battle that you don't necessarily win, and you stay locked in almost a Cold War? Pardon the lousy analogy given the world's current climate. But the fatigue, the brain fog, the chronic inflammation and gut health disturbances of long COVID is a workshop for immune function. I think microbiome may hold some answers. I think managing that self, non-self identification challenge that we have is going to be part of the answer. But clearly, we haven't solved long COVID yet. And this needs to be a focus for the industry for our thinking. So what's emerging? What's happening next in the industry? This is really where things get exciting. We have immune training emerging as a concept. And this is, I used to be a competitive cyclist, and I trained to be faster, more responsive, and to recover better after hard efforts. The same is true with our immune system. And now we're all athletes, immune athletes in the global stage with some pretty tough competition. We have a pretty smart virus. We're reopening the world, which is going to unleash the normal pandemonium amongst us. And we certainly have environmental challenges, which task the immune system further. So when I think of immune training, the company Benicaros, the ingredient Benicaros by Nutraleads uses a carrot-based araminogalactan, which is a kind of an immune sugar, to modify or train immune activity, to prepare and prime, but not necessarily activate immune function. This is very different from, say, an echinacea, where you put it in your tongue and already the secretory response, it's tingling and salivating, and then you take it and, all the immune membranes get lit up. We don't necessarily want to boost, we want to prime and support. I look at Amuse by Kyohaka. CVS was the first to introduce this amazing ingredient, priming PDC cells, the dendritic cells that drive the immune system. Biogalena by Algitech, a algae-based beta-glucan, priming and preparing immune function, or new ingredients such as Immune Duo by Bausch and Lomb, a very exotic ginseng extract. I think the bigger lesson of looking at all of these together is that look who's leading. It's Bayer, it's CVS, it's Bausch and Lomb. The big players, the global strategics are stepping forward with very, very interesting innovation. It's not necessarily the new DTC guy, direct to consumer people that are coming out with the most insightful formulas first. There's still quite a bit of that. But I look at right now with immune supplements as a hallmark of who's changing the dance. What comes next? I see Immune Plus as a major theme. We now know sleep is the single biggest controllable for most of us impact on immune function. If you have a good night's sleep, your immune system is well. Stress wipes out the immune system. Gut function absolutely needs to be supported. And then I'm seeing interesting things. My old friends at LycoRed are talking about skin health and barrier function as immune support. We also see other bigger trends, personalization, testing and self-knowledge, using apps, looking at your social contacts. If you're in contact with people who are sick, you're likely to get sick. Trackers like our smartwatches will give us early warning. It can monitor our sleep. It can check our oxygen levels. It can detect changes in temperature. What I haven't seen yet are at-home testing for immune biomarkers. Wait for it. It's on its way. I've seen some remarkable development of ingredients with AI and smart, machine learning. Companies like SkyMount with their deep drug platform developed the first machine-developed immune formulation called Inhibitol this past year. You have companies like Brightseed struggling with this, Wellomics and Silico Medicine, all doing brilliant work on developing new approaches and novel compounds for immune function. I'm going to wrap up with more precise claims. I think the days of boosts or supports immune function are behind us. We need to be a little more nuanced in how we talk about the immune system, a little more descriptive on precisely what we do. And that requires us to better understand what we're creating for our customers. With that, I'm going to open the floor up for questions. But first, I'm going to say huge thanks to the team at VitaFoods for allowing me to be part of this presentation today.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Ken, for that very insightful presentation on immune health. And yes, we will jump into Q&A now. There is a couple questions that have come in. So the first one is, given the role of the microbiome as a key part of the immune system, how can we effectively shift its functioning long-term versus just daily probiotics?
That's a great question. And, I'm massively interested and try to read at least 2 papers a day on microbiome so that I can be aware of what I'm not keeping up with. I'm going to challenge the industry to tell me what a healthy microbiome looks like. I don't know yet. That said, we do know some of the major species, and we also have effects tied to certain species in the biome. We're also now learning that downstream metabolites of these bugs are incredibly important. So I like to keep things simple, and I'm a big fan of I'm an older guy, so I like to bring things back. I think fiber and complex carbohydrates are underplayed in the industry. I think that if we feed our internal garden, our microbiome effectively, you develop nice levels of all of these short chain fatty acids, which are really the main drivers of immune function in the gut. So I'm a big fiber guy. I think that's really important.
Amazing. And I think we have time for one quick question. Is there a danger in the use of too many natural anti-inflammatories to potentially adversely impact our innate immune response?
Absolutely, and I think it's something we need to be careful. I will say that natural anti-inflammatories function differently than the monochemical drugs. So, for instance, turmeric is not going to turn off my immune system. Celebrex will. Advil might. So allow early engagement with the immune system and learn to be a little uncomfortable with some of those, Celsius's markers for immune function. At the same time, don't put yourself at risk and always seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner.
Perfect. Well, that's all the time we have. Once again, thank you, Ken, for joining us. And to our audience, if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Ken directly on the platform after this. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you in the next session.